So. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, wherever you may be around the world, and welcome to Splendid Isolation History number 45. And this evening we're going to be talking about Clive and the British conquest of India, as kind of a follow-up to last week's stream about the British conquest of Canada in the same sort of era. As always, to give people time to join the stream, I'm going to start us off with a tune.
Take up the white man's burden, send forth the best ye breed. Go bind your sons to exile, to serve your captives' need. To wait in heavy harness on flooded folk and wall. Your new gods sullen peoples have devil and have child. Take up the white man's burden, in patience to abide, to veil the threat of terror and check the show of pride. By open speech and simple, 100 times made plain, to seek another's profit and work another's gain. Take up the white man's burden, the savage wars of peace. Fill full the mouth of famine and bid the sickness cease. And when your goal is nearest, the end for others sought, what's love that heed and folly? Bring all your hopes to naught. Take up the white man's burden, no tawdry rule of kings, but toil of serf and sweeper, the tale of common things. The ports ye shall not enter, the roads ye shall not tread. Go make them with your living and mark them with your dead. Take up the white man's burden and reap his old reward. The blame of those ye better, the hate of those ye guard. The cry of those ye humor are slowly towards the light. Why brought ye us from bondage, a loved Egyptian night? Take up the white man's burden, ye dare not stoop to less, nor call too loud on freedom.
And that was, of course, the excellent Chris Gard. If you like good music, go and check out Chris Gard's channel on YouTube. And you can also follow him on X, on Twitter, where we are also live at the moment. Mitch is the main guest this evening. I don't know if anyone else is going to join us. They're welcome to if they want to, if they're on my Discord. Mitch, how are you going today?
Same old, same old.
Now, this was your idea for your suggestion for a history stream. So I'm going to mainly let you take it away, mate. So off you go.
Where to start? So Robert Clive, when you take a look at his, let's say, early life, there's a lot of mystery to it because we don't exactly know what he did as a young lad growing up. We know that he was born to minor gentry in Shropshire, around the Market Drayton area, which is right on the border between my home county of Staffordshire, meeting with Shropshire, and his home was a place called Stoke Hall, which I believe is under the National Trust, like a Grade 2 listed under the National Trust. I believe it's still seeable, although because of modern controversy, should we say, with Robert Clive and his conquest of India, it's a matter of I don't know how much the National Trust have probably censored a lot of his childhood. I mean, there's still a pub in Market Drayton, I believe, that it's called Clive and Popine or something like that. It's been many moons since I've been around that neck of the woods, but yeah. And the thing about imitate.
Isn't it, Mitch? I think there's a church somewhere that he's supposed to have climbed the spire of, isn't there, when he was a young guy?
Yeah, I've heard it. I can't find the name of it from the top of my head, but by all rights, he was very rowdy and boisterous. Like, for example, it was reckoned that when he was a teenager, rather than studying at school, for which he was known to be quite lazy and not very diligent at school, he was known to be extorting shopkeepers. And one time, he actually put a dam, just improvised dam, in a small gutter to flood one shopkeeper's property because said shopkeeper refused to pay him tenpence.
The church is St Mary's Church in Market Drayton.
Yeah, that's also where he went to grammar school as well, where because his father was a lawyer down London way, and the thing was, the family had some wealth, but they weren't swimming in wealth. Like, as a lawyer, he didn't have that many clients, and the father was often in financial trouble. In fact, he was often difficult to deal with, and Clive was a lot of ways closer to his mother, and that kind of makes him a lot more. That kind of contributes to his personality in the long run in terms of people, because you can argue that Clive becomes a lot more. I don't want to say egotistical, but it's kind of like he does have that great sense of ambition and a great sense of audacity.
His father was noted for having a bad temper, and so was Clive sometimes as well. And also, I think Clive was a bit inclined to depression sometimes, I believe.
Yeah, he was known for jumping the gun. But there was there have been times where even before he ends his own life by committing suicide with a blade. But there were times where he did attempt suicide when he was young, and there was one time where he tried to shoot himself with a gun in his late teens or early 20s when he was in India, and the gun failed to shoot twice, despite the shot being in there. Then he asked his assistant to fire off a gun outside, which he actually did, and Robert Clive just turned his eyebrow and just went, "I must be destined for something."
I saw that in that. Did you see the old British movie I put up on the Discord the other day?
Oh, I haven't. I've been. I meant to watch it.
You didn't have time to watch it. You can go back and watch it. It's on YouTube. That has that incident in it where he tries to shoot himself.
Yeah, and it's one of the things where, as well, he was also known to be quite sickly as a kid, where at the age of 4, he nearly died from fever. And he was known to be quite sickly for the rest of his life, which is why when, for example, he's 17, in the early 17, because he was born in 1725, and he was dispatched to India amidst the War of the Austrian Succession. So 1742. Everyone thinks he's not going to amount to much because they're thinking, well, the guy is quite sickly, and he was quite and he's in his school record is seen as quite mediocre. Like, he was known to be quite lazy. He wasn't particularly a good pupil, and and a lot of people regarded him as basically a little turd as a kid growing up, quite rowdy and boisterous. He could have studied to become a lawyer, but he didn't. But people would say he didn't have a temperament, so they just backed him off to India.
So he went out to India as a writer, didn't he? Which was the term for a clerk, basically, in those days. He went to India not as a soldier, but as a clerk.
Yeah, and like because the thing was, back in those days, the East India Company was seen as, it's kind of like a modern British example of like the old Spartans saying, come back with your shield or on it. That's exactly what Clive's family said to him. Look, do not come back until you've made yourself a man. Like, do not come back until you've scored quite a bit of wealth for yourself, because it was quite a time of opportunity. But also, the voyage would take. I mean, you're talking to go from, like, let's say somewhere like Bristol or London all the way to, let's say, Madras. You're easily talking like at least 8 months. And along the way, like, for example, he loses his clothes, and he's forced to rely upon his father to bail him out, because he loses all his clothes, and he has to buy some off some friends and off the company. Because the thing was, if you were in debt as a new employee, you would be sacked straight away. So he had to rely upon his father to bail him out at first, which was a bit of a tall ask when you think of it, because the father was not known for. Like, his father, Richard Clive, was not good at handling money. He was often getting himself into debt all the time, and having poor investments. So the fact that Robert was able to rely upon his father, it's kind of like a God save in that instance. And yeah, he's a clerk working under, I forget his first name, Morse, who was the company guy in Madras. And the thing, he said it takes a while for him to settle in. He befriends a fair few guys, such as Edmund Maskelyne, whose sister he later marries by another Margaret. But that happens later on. And yeah, and one thing that he has to do early on is he starts learning languages such as Persian. He learns. I don't know if, like, because technically we call it Hindi, but back in those days, like, Hindi wasn't technically like a national language. It was kind of like just a bunch of dialects different people spoke all over the place.
Yeah, Hindustani is what it would have been referred to back then, and some military theorists are saying Urdu was around. Yes, Urdu was another one, but. Have you got any maps or illustrations or anything you want to use, Mitch? It's because it's worth pointing out, just while Mitch is sorting himself out, that although the Brits have been in India for quite a while, Britain didn't run most of India when Clive first goes out there. By no means did Britain run most of India.
No, it was
India as a state, of course, just didn't exist. There was no such place. There was a collection of independent Hindu and also Muslim states and satrapies and all over the place. It was a big mess. And India itself, as a unitary state, certainly did not exist before.
Yeah, like the closest thing you had to that was a Mughal Empire, but even then, by the time that Robert Clive comes into India, like the Mughal Empire is fractured. Like, it's more a lot. You have, for example, you might have, for example, like Bengal up here. Technically, they pay homage to the Mughal Emperor based in Delhi, but I mean, Delhi regularly gets sacked at this point by the Pathans, or as we would say in modern English, Pashtuns from Afghanistan.
Yeah.
So. And you also, so you have, for example, Calcutta, which is it. That was built up by the East India Company starting from the 1690s onward. Same with Madras down here in the Carnatic. So those are the two main. You do have Bombay, which was gifted to us as a dowry from a Portuguese when Charles II got married to Catherine of Braganza in the 1660s.
Yeah, that was the same time that Britain got Tenerife for a while in North Africa, for the same reason.
Yeah, and it's because the thing is, yeah, you have
not Tenerife, Tangier. I beg your pardon.
Yeah, so you have alongside Madras, you have also some forts. For example, not far from Madras, you have Fort St. George, which is the main fortification, normally held by around 200 Europeans. Here, the French have their main trading base at Pondicherry, which they controlled for a long time until Indian independence.
Even afterwards, actually, they held on to it even afterwards, as did Portugal, by the way. Portugal held on to Goa long after the Brits left. By the way, can I just say to people in the audience, if you want to look at these maps and things that Mitch is putting up, make your screen full screen, and they'll be a lot easier to see.
Yeah, and then you've got the Dutch East India Company based on Negapatam, but by this point of the game, long after the Glorious Revolution, like the Dutch are very much a junior partner at best. Like they're just not really much of a power player like they used to be. So it's really between us and the French in the context of India. And you have, so that's Carnatic, and then you have the Hooghly River along modern day Bangladesh or Bengal. So you have Calcutta here, the French main trading post near at Chandanagar, and then there's this place called Kasim Bazaar, which was a factory, which we also held in the. So those are the two main vectors of influence. Alongside
and for the people in the audience, a factory in this sense in India or anywhere in the Far East in this era was actually a warehouse, basically.
Yeah, because the thing about Bengal was Bengal was very much like a jewel in the Mughal crown, so to speak. Like you had you have for example stuff like saltpeter, which was important for gunpowder, as well as being massively agricultural. And so that's what? Oh yeah, we have the Maharathas or Maratha Confederacy who are causing trouble in central India, and they are very much because Maharata, I believe, it's a name of an ethnic group, but also becomes a byword for like these sort of rowdy young men who they don't really have much to go off. They're interested in war and plunder, which is why a lot of them join us in the.
They were principally light cavalrymen, so they were very mobile, and as you say, Mitch, they're pretty much bandits, really, as much as anything else.
Yeah, so you have the Mughal Empire. It's split into three. You have the northern sector around here, which technically is ruled over by the emperor, but you have what's called a grand vizier, kind of like a prime minister who holds real power by this point in the game. You have down south here, it's kind of like technically the Mughal Empire run the place, but the powers there, like the Nawabs or Maharajas and so on, Zamindars, whatever title they have them, they're a lot more independent. I don't want. Autonomous is undercutting. I'd say they just do their own thing. They don't really care much what happens in Delhi at this point. Because I said Delhi just gets regularly sacked at this point by guys like Nadir Shah from Persia or the Pashtuns of Afghanistan. So
there was in fact a bit of a power vacuum in India, which is what Clive and the British expanded into, basically.
Yeah. So where you have. We have Robert Clive first stepping into the his role in the military side of things was in the midst of the War of the Austrian Succession in 1743 into 44. You have on one hand the French East India Company led by a guy called Dupleix, Joseph Francois Dupleix, I believe his name was, and his wife by the name of Johanna Begum, who I believe she was like half Portuguese, half Indian, if I remember correctly, and very much she was like Dupleix was very competent. Like he's very much like a French Robert Clive. You know, if Robert Clive hadn't surfaced upon India in the way he did, Dupleix would have won. Dupleix was very shrewd, good at allying with Carnatic and Bengali rulers. By all rights, like, he was very much a challenging opponent of his time. And in the War of Austrian Succession, it was just a matter of a lot of military incompetence. For start, we lose Madras to Dupleix, and we try to compensate that by taking Pondicherry. But the main guy in charge is a guy called Rear Admiral Edward Boscawen, who, while he's good at the naval side of things, he has no business commanding an army on the field, and it becomes a massive disaster. We managed to save it through diplomacy by getting Madras back, but after this, you have a guy called Stringer Lawrence, who's a veteran of the war in Flanders, as well as a veteran of the Battle of Culloden. So he's brought in to professionalise the East India Company's army, because there's multiple deficiencies along the lines of discipline and as well as lack of preparedness.
It's interesting because last week on this stream we were doing the British conquest of Canada, and of course General Wolfe, who was killed at his victory at Quebec, was also a veteran of the Battle of Culloden in 1745.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about Stringer Lawrence is he was from the same neck of the woods as Clive. We're both from Shropshire. So, and Stringer Lawrence, he's the first guy to really notice Clive's military acumen, because one time when you had the siege of Pondicherry, Clive was in charge of a small artillery battery, and he was recommending that they fire point blank at the gates to breach them. But the problem was the guy in charge, Boscawen, he said, well, that's just desperate. Like, it wouldn't work that way because we'd probably get harassed or whatever. And he ordered the cannons just bombard all over the walls. In so doing, no breach is ever made, and we end up retreating, and it just becomes a disaster, which really screws us off. And he's like, I said, only because of good diplomacy in the peace that ends the Austrian War of Succession that we get Madras back. But so in the meantime, over the next, not even that, it wasn't even long before Robert Clive gets another chance to practice his art of war, because when we get back to Madras, like the East India Company, they've got a massive army of sepoys and Europeans who, at the moment, they've got no war to fight, but they're just sitting on their fun, twiddling their thumbs, going, "What do we do now?" And then in comes this guy from the Tanjore area, which is around here, by the name of Shahaji, I believe his name was, who says, "Look, my holdings, like my kingdom down in Tanjore, has been usurped from me. Could you help me get it back?" Because the thing was, Shahaji, he was usurped by a guy called Pratap Singh. And the thing about Shahaji was he was widely hated by his own people. Like, no one likes him. But we decided to go along with it because, well, first off, Pratap Singh was an ally of the French. And also, it just provided something for this marshaled together army under Boscawen and as well as Stringer Lawrence and Clive to start flexing some military muscle, as well as to upend France. Because while you do have, like, let's say, a conflict in Europe, a war in India takes its own pace, because you've got a factor of, like, the distance of travel and logistics and so on between India and Europe means that, it's kind of like the French and Indian War in North America. It goes on 2 years before the 7 Years' War is formally declared. So you have like this advance going in from like Fort St. George towards Tanjore, which again, it goes pretty badly. And the thing was, again, it was saved up by diplomacy because Pratap Singh, he says, look, I will give you this port of Devi Kotai, which is our main objective because you see it's very strategically placed. So that, for example, you have Madras here in the north, and then you have Devi Kotai here in the south. Very strategic place as well, along the Coleraine River, along with Trichinopoly, which is one of the main centers of power in the Carnatic region as well. So all we had to do from that point onward was just put Charge in a comfortable place. We've just paid him just to not cause any trouble.
It's also worth pointing out that there were British Army troops in India, not very many at this stage, by the way. And in fact, not that many until after the Indian Mutiny, really. But there were British troops in India that belonged to the British Army, and they were kind of loaned to the Honourable East India Company to use alongside their Indian sepoys, who had British officers and sometimes even British NCOs at this era. So, yeah.
Yeah, so you have the context of you take, for example, sepoys now. They vary a lot in their effectiveness because, for example, if let's say you were to attack a sepoy army in the dead of night, you could easily scare them. Like they were kind of sepoys weren't exactly known for their courage compared to the European troops, and you generally had. The thing was, the French sepoys were less reliable because they weren't as paid as well as what we paid our sepoys. So it was kind of one of the things where mixed in with Stringer Lawrence bringing in discipline of professionalism.
I would also say, Mitch, that not only did the French not pay their sepoys as well, I don't think they were quite so well trained either.
Now, the French troops, in terms of the European ones they brought along, were well trained, and they did have like good relationships with the local lords. But those with Duplay, now you have Duplay at this point of the game. He decided to play his next card in the area, which is there's sort of this Carnatic civil war going on where you have Chanda Sahib. That's it. Chanda Sahib, who is a French supported claimant onto the Carnatic throne, versus our claimant, whose name I can't remember the guy's name from the top of my head, but this is where Robert Clive begins to shine because the war at first goes pretty badly for us, even though the guy we supported at the time had a bigger army and had more support amongst his own people and the elite in the Carnatic area, to a point where the Duplay had his army besiege Trichinopoly, which I said is pretty much a capital of a Carnatic area. However, in this Franco-Carnatic desire to end the war by taking Trichinopoly, you have Robert Clive. He notices a good chance because he notices that Arcot up here, which is the capital of Chanda Sahib, he notices it's defended by a skeleton garrison and it's defended pretty much by sepoys. The thing is, this is where you grow to understand how much of a genius Robert Clive was, because he understood that sepoys were easily spooked. So he advances towards Arcot in the midst of a thunderstorm, and the Indian garrison at Arcot, they all just give up. They all just run away without firing a bullet at Clive's army. Like, Clive only had 500 men, 200 Europeans and 300 sepoys, but because he advanced in the middle of a thunderstorm, the Indian garrison at Arcot, they all just legged it, not even firing a single shot.
It's quite a cheap way to win a battle.
Yeah, and
cheap in men, not a bad way to win a battle. Just cheap in casualties.
Yeah, so he didn't even lose a single man, and you have not long afterwards, you have the siege of Arcot, where you have something like 30,000 from the Franco-Carnatic side besiege Arcot against 500 on Robert Clive's side, and it's mainly through psychological warfare on part of Robert Clive, alongside his audacity, that he actually wins the siege. And this particular battle, it really upends Duplay's entire strategy because he was hoping to consolidate the entire Carnatic. And also, another thing with Duplay was, by nature, Duplay was quite optimistic. So he says to the French East India Company, give me X amount of money and I won't need a penny more. Well, the siege of Arcot completely upends that entire strategy because now he has to spend a lot more money. He can't go cap in hand towards East India Company nor to the Royal Court of Versailles asking for more money. So he's the architect of his own misfortune here. But to be fair, I would also say, you know, I can understand the optimism in the sense of, well, before Robert Clive came along and upended the entire strategic balance of power in this neck of the woods, the French won up a foot, and then in comes Robert Clive, who, by taking Arcot and holding it successfully, completely upends the balance of power in the Carnatic. So you have Chanda Sahib, he is forced to come to terms with the East India Company, and he's forced to scrap his alliance with the French, and our claimant actually wins this, what we call the Second Carnatic War.
Yeah, one of the things, of course, that Robert Clive was famous for was his diplomacy and off the battlefield. He was quite often involved in fairly intricate schemes and talking to various sides and making deals and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah. So you have because this is one thing he learns off Duplay because it very much like Duplay's art of war. Clive learns very early on. For example, there was one time where Clive, he advanced prematurely in the midst of in the midst of his earlier conflict, where he had something like largely a force of sepoys. He advanced too far beyond Stringer Lawrence's main force in the midst of like the Tanjore campaign and so on. And the thing was, the sepoys he brought with him, they were easily cowed by like this much smaller cavalry force. But this smaller cavalry force, I believe it was Zamindars, who by nature were quite aggressive. And the thing about sepoys was that they were easily cowed and easily spooked. So you just have this position where Clive learns early on, you can have a certain amount of sepoys, but you need to have, and this is one thing that Clive does a lot, where he'll have something like at least 40% of his force be European, such as, for example, Bateau Placé, where it's like half his force were Europeans and the other half, or just over half, being sepoys. Likewise, he does this with.
So you can, the European troops can set a good example to the sepoys. It's interesting, actually, Mitch. I'm no great expert on this era, but I know rather more about later on in India, particularly things like the Anglo-Sikh wars, etc., in the 1840s. And even then, because the Sikhs had a fearsome military reputation, and indeed they were the toughest opponents the British fought in India and had more artillery than we did, the sepoys would often hang back when they were attacking Sikh entrenchments and stuff. And this is like in the 1840s, so 80 years after the stuff we're talking about at the moment, 90 years after it. And it was quite common, apart from the Gurkhas, of course. But the Indian sepoys would very often hang back, and in a brigade of a British battalion and two sepoy battalions, it was often only the British battalion which ended up going over the ramparts and attacking the Sikhs. The Indians would hang back and fire from a distance and stuff, you know?
Yeah. Matt, but I can understand like why, because this happens more on the French side in terms of like 7 Years' War, but you do have like this sort of prejudice that develops of, you know, like European officers, they don't have a great deal of respect for a lot of the sepoys because, as I said, you know, on the French side especially, to be fair, on the French side, as previously mentioned, they don't get paid as well. Whereas on the British side, we do pay them a lot better. And also, it's mainly because of guys like Stringer Lawrence that our sepoys perform a lot better in the context of this conflict, as well as the 7 Years' War. Whereas the French sepoys, because the French sepoys didn't perform as well as ours, the French get the wrong lesson from it, which is that they feel they shouldn't. So when alongside Dupleix being discredited from this, and to a point where he's replaced, and in the context of the 7 Years' War, he's replaced by this Irish guy by the name of Thomas Arthur, came to Lally, who is complete opposite of Dupleix. Because whereas Dupleix was, Rongtal was correct in saying he wanted to adopt more Oriental style. Yeah, because Dupleix, as mentioned, he did have a half Indian, half Portuguese wife, so he was very much in touch with the way diplomacy in India worked. Like, he very much understood that you can't get anywhere without support from the local elites. But after Dupleix is gone, the French leadership in this area, they completely go the opposite way. They just don't bother working with the local elites, and that actually screws them over, which is why we end up winning we win in India as opposed to the French. But that's I'll come on to that later on. So in the midst of in the sort of interbellum between this Second Carnatic War up until the Third Carnatic War, or what we would call the 7 Years' War, Robert Clive, he goes back to his clerical job, and he does get promoted alongside his friend Edmund Maskelyne. At Fort St. David, he gets married to Margaret in 1755, if I remember correctly. 1745. Sorry, 1745.
It's worth pointing out that in those days there were very few white women in India. It was quite. I mean, Mitch was saying how Duplessis was married to a half Indian woman. This was quite common, even in the British services in this era. It wasn't uncommon for white guys to marry an Indian woman because there were almost no white women in India at this early stage.
Yeah, it's like for example, Robert Clive. He had to deal a lot with fever in this part of the world. Like, he also had another health problem he had was he had to deal with stones in his gallbladder, which dealt him a great deal of pain. So he ended up getting addicted to opium to a point where one time he ordered 6 pounds of it.
That's a lot. I could notice AI Shire Tory in the chat. William Grenville, if you want to join us, because I know you've done some stuff on Clive and some of your streams and what have you. So if you want to join us, feel free. The link is in the public bit of the Discord. So. Someone's saying gallstones are extremely painful. I've never had them, I'm happy to say, but I can well believe that they are.
But I'm at So that was of this subhuman side, and just to exchange some funny anecdotes. So there was one time where, you're going back to when he was like 19 or 20, when he just arrived in India, where he felt that he wasn't up to the mark. He tried to shoot himself with his own pistol, but the fact that he didn't fire, and he raised his heavy eyebrows, and he said, "Well, I must be reserved for something. I've twice snapped at my own head." And there was some arguments that the story is a load of crap, and it was only after the fact, because there is an element of we don't know too much about Robert Clive before he arrives into India and really serves the EIC.
Didn't he get in a duel because he accused somebody of cheating at cards, which was a bad deal if you were a gentleman in those days? And so they fought a duel and both missed. And then the guy was so mad who he'd accused of cheating, presumably he wasn't, that he loaded his pistol and was going to fire him again and demanded that Clive apologise. And Clive just said, "No, I will not." So and then the guy got control of himself and lowered his pistol.
Yeah, so I'll read to you this passage, because this was before he got married. So when they were not whoring, they drank and played cards, they being Robert Clive and his mates, who didn't get married as of yet. At one of these card games, Clive suggested that a fellow officer was cheating. Such a remark was not to be taken lightly, and the player demanded satisfaction. In this duel, both sides went wide. That should have ended the matter, but the officer was still angry, and he pointed his pistol at Clive's head and insisted he retract. Clive's mouth set a stubborn line, and he said, "Fire and be damned." The officer then hesitated and lowered his pistol. Shooting was no answer. Clive was mad. So yeah, there's a great sense of you can say that Clive is massively ballsy for very audacious.
Yes, he was. That's one of the things about that story. It does prove that for sure.
Yeah, and just to get a picture of what the fortunes of like the conflict was in India was like for us before Robert Clive really stepped into the mark. You have, for example, Clive. He wrote despairingly how very ignorant we were of the art of war in those days. Some of the engineers were masters of a theory without practice, and those seemed wanting in resolution. Others there were who understood neither, and yet were possessed of courage sufficient to have gone on with undertaking if only they had known how to go about it. There was scarce an officer who knew whether the engineers were acting right or wrong until it was too late in the season, and we had lost too many men to change our approach again. So that's just to get like a small snapshot of how much Clive's military mind really was a valuable asset in this part of the world, because before him we just floundered. We weren't really doing too well. Like for example, disease, the elements. Because one thing about Rear Admiral Bosco, when he had his ships, but they get battered a lot by the southern Indian winds, because you get these like horrible monsoon winds and these horrible hurricanes almost that might also make logistics a hell of a burden, which is why again you need good relations with the local Indian lords. So
you got the monsoons in India, which obviously resulted in rough seas and lots of wind and all the rest of it.
Yeah. And the thing was, it wasn't like the French were perfect either, because they had this Swiss guy by the name of Paradis, who was Duplessis' deputy. But the problem was Paradis wasn't a nobleman; came from Switzerland, so there's only so far in the hierarchy he could go up, despite being a very skilled engineer. And it's one of the things where, to understand one reason why we win in India, it's because if you acquitted yourself rather well in the service, whether you were a clerk or military mind or good administrator, or whatever, you had a good road to ascend up a hierarchy. Whereas on the French side, it's a matter of if you weren't a noble or you weren't even a Frenchman, like Paradis, it doesn't matter how competent you are, but you are restricted in how far you can ascend up a hierarchy. So contrast that, however, to Robert Clive has said.
Well, in the French military at this stage, before the French Revolution, if you weren't a nobleman, you couldn't get a commission usually. Certainly not in the Royal Army. So,
yeah, and that's the thing. Just to get like and also to get like another picture of how good Clive was as a military mind in the early days of his command. Like he said, as an eyewitness described it, all the company's troops had an affection for this young man, from observing me, alacrity and presence of mind, which always accompanied him in danger. His platoon, animated by exhortation, fired again with new courage and great vivacity upon the enemy. Because the thing was, as previously, it's Clive. He was the kind of guy who he was truly in his element when he was commanding troops out in the field. And the longer he spent in India, the more his sort of body not only adjusted, but also you get the sense that it's kind of like when you look up, let's say, someone like Stonewall Jackson. Stonewall Jackson suffered a lot from medical issues before the American Civil War. But as soon as he's in the saddle, commanding armies out in the field, all those medical issues just disappear, and he's fully enmeshed into the war. Like you could say that with someone like Robert Clive. Like he was just a natural born leader of men.
So some of it was probably psychological, Mitch.
Yeah, I can.
We've been going for about 3/4 of an hour, so if you don't mind, I'll interrupt you for a couple of minutes just to do some channel admin. First of all, if you're watching this stream, either live or if you're watching it later, please hit the like button. It really does help the channel. Doesn't cost you anything. Takes 5 seconds, or even 5 seconds, 2 seconds. And also, if you look at the top chat, you can support the channel, or you can ask super chat questions, which Mitch and I will address towards the end of the stream via entropy. And I see we already have one chat from Rongtao Wu for $25. Thank you very much, Rongtao Wu. That's very kind of you. Okay, but as I say, if you want to, if you want to support the channel, that's the way to do it, guys, and it does really help because I'm spending quite a lot of money running this channel at the moment on YouTube and on StreamYard and X. So yeah, sorry, Mitch, I do carry on, mate. I beg your pardon.
Yeah, I'm just trying to collect because between like 1744 up until like the start of the 7 Years' War, I'm struggling to think of what much to say because he does return to England where he sorts out his family's affairs. Because one thing that is a common occurrence is that Robert Clive often comes back home, and he also often has to bail out his father, who often gets into debt because, as previously mentioned, like he was a lawyer who didn't have that many clients, and there were minor gentry who. Richard Clive often was the kind of guy who at times lived beyond his means, and even though his wife Rebecca, Clive's mother, could handle him and his temper, it was a matter of she still couldn't make him avoid poor judgmental decisions regarding like their family finances. So when Robert Clive comes back and he's getting like a good bonus for his wartime service on behalf of the EIC, as well as, of course, he starts to build up himself a fortune alongside his wife, who, while Robert Clive built himself a fortune, his wife was also good at managing the finances as well as, of course, managing his his temperamental nature, because he was known to be quite mercurial, where one minute he was affable, he was generous, but then he could also be irritable. Especially, which you can understand, given, as I said, he got that pain with stone in his gallbladder. So it's kind of one of the things where he was kind of like Jekyll and Hyde in a certain sense. It's either you got on really well with him or you didn't, and there are plenty of people in the hierarchy who didn't get on with him over the years. But yeah, so he spends a fair few years back in England where he'll renovate Stoke Hall, as well as sort out the family finances. He has a daughter by the name of Jenny at this point. If I remember correctly, Jenny does die, unfortunately, quite young. I think she was like 5 or 6. And she dies amidst the... As Robert Clive, for example, later on deals with Bengal in the 7 Years' War, that's when he hears of his daughter having passed away. But yeah, he's building up himself a family, finances, and also a reputation. Because, of course, a guy who's becoming as successful as him is climbing up the social ladder from the minor gentry that he was born into as a kid. So I'm trying to think, what more to say, because there's not much to say about what he does in peacetime before the 7 Years' War. Yeah, so
that's fine, Mitch. I mean, I think you've covered the first bit of his career, and you can probably move on now towards kind of the climax of his career at the Battle of Plassey and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah, so in 1756, the Nawab of Bengal, whose name I can't pronounce for the life of me, but so anyway, his grandson Siraj ad-Dawla takes over Bengal. Now, Siraj ad-Dawla, he was impulsive, he was violent, he wasn't the kind of guy people could easily get on with, and he envied our possessions in Calcutta and Qasim Bazaar. Like, he quite envied our trading holdings on behalf of the AIC. So one thing he does pretty early on in his reign is he plots with all manner of ilk to go against us. And in the midst of a 7 Years' War, he does actually side against us alongside the French, and he takes over first Qasim Bazaar, and then he storms Calcutta, where you have the infamous Black Hole of Calcutta, which there are some details which are a bit iffy. Look, for example, there's no way you can fit 146 men inside a small prison cell. It's more like 24, and it was quite, but the inhumane conditions they were kept in is completely true. Like they were kept in.
They were kept in terrible conditions. They were closely standing closely together, and they had to stand. You couldn't sit down, and also they had no water.
Yeah, and also this is like June or July time as well, so it's at the heat of the Indian summer.
Indeed.
So yeah. Now, some people say, well, Siraj ad-Dowlah wasn't guilty. He didn't personally know of the conditions. But I'm like, well, I don't think you have to be a genius to know putting 24 men inside a cell like that in the midst of summer is a good idea. And they say, well, and also his subordinates were afraid to wake him up because he had his temperament similar to someone like Joseph Stalin in terms of how violent he could be and how very, like, if you were to wake him up prematurely, he would have your head. So it's fair to say he was not. You get this because one thing a lot of Indian nationalists will admit, they'll talk about Mir Jafar being a traitor or Robert Clive being this, that, and the other, and they'll make out Siraj ad-Dowlah to be this innocent. Oh, he was just a young lad who got screwed over. It's like, well, no, he was quite a vicious young man. He was quite envious and quite driven to violent, impulsive nature. So mix that in with. Mixed value. So when the EIC get wind of in Madras, naturally they turn to Robert Clive to sort out this mess because he's proven himself as a capable battle commander in the field, and he has to work with a vice admiral by the name of Charles Watson in the Madras area to sail up the Hooghly River and take back Calcutta and Qasim Bazaar, as well as get Siraj ad-Dowlah to come to terms. Because at this point, the main thing they're thinking of is, well, we want to have our holdings, our properties restored, and for there to be reparations alongside secure guarantees so that the Bengali authorities never again take over Calcutta and Qasim Bazaar from us again. It's not until much later that we get the ambition of taking over Bengal in its entirety and becoming a de facto authority, taking over the role of a Nawab. But so they set off from Madras. There were two ships that had trouble, HMS Cumberland and HMS Marlborough, that had issues along the way. They had to deal with winds and among other issues. But yeah, when you get into December 1758, if I remember correctly, the year, they sail up the Hooghly River. They first come across the fort of Baj, which there's a funny anecdote as to how it was taken. So Fort Baj was held by something like 100 or 200, like a few hundred, something like that, held under the command of a guy called Manik Chand, who was, by all rights, I mean, he was just a greedy aristocrat who had his own reasons for fighting on Siraj ad-Dowlah's side. So you have this drunk sailor from Scotland, able-bodied seaman Strachan from Scotland. He'd been drinking deeply from a keg of arrack, diluted with water, to a point where he was so thoroughly drunk, and with the logic of it inebriated, he saw no sense in all of his hanging about. So he thought, well, if no one can be asked to get this resolved, he'll do it by himself. So he draws his saber and yells, "The fort is mine. Lay down your arms," to the sepoy garrison. And the Indian garrison, who, bearing in mind this is a night time as well, so the superstitious Indian garrison, they're all spooked. They just surrender on the spot.
Obviously had no sentries.
Nope. Nah, so, like I forget which channel it was, but it wouldn't be out of place to say he literally just kicked down the door and just said, "Lay down your weapons," while swinging around a saber while heavily drunk, and the entire garrison just surrendered on the spot. And the only casualty we suffered was one guy from friendly fire.
Didn't some of the sepoys attack him because I think the sailor broke his sword when he stabbed one of them, didn't he?
Yeah, his sword snapped in half while killing off one of a few sepoys who dared to resist. But it was all over in minutes. And yeah, a captain by the name of Dougal Campbell, who'd been killed accidentally by one of the sailors. Afterwards, when Vice Admiral Watson took Strachan to task for his rash and ill-disciplined conduct, Strachan was heard to have said, "If I am flogged for his here action, I will never take again another fort by myself for as long as I live, by God," which is why he wasn't flogged.
Yes, a hero indeed. Arak, by the way, is the local spirits in that part of the world.
So you then have not long after Baj falls, we easily take Calcutta. Afterwards, we come across Chandernagore, which, as mentioned earlier, is held by the French. It's not as well fortified as Calcutta, but still has quite a fair few cannons. And the fleet does get to suffer some of a battering, even to a point where Vice Admiral Watson, he nearly gets shot by snipers on the French side on the ramparts. One of the sailors actually said to Watson, "Sir, like, there are these snipers that they're all gunning for you." And Watson said something said a line to the meaning of, "Let them take a shot. Let them take their shots," and we all missed. So with that, another sense of awe farming man, like Chandernagore falls after a massive cannonade from the ships sailing up the Hooghly River. And because the thing was, we were kind of negotiating with Suraj ad-Dawla, because at this point, Suraj ad-Dawla, he didn't have to worry about Robert Clive advancing up the Hooghly River. He also had to deal with. He heard reports that a Pashtun army from Afghanistan sacked Delhi and were headed towards Bengal. So he had to deal with not only to deal with what's going on for Hooghly, but also had to deal with a Pashtun army, which was looking set to gun for Bengal. So he was coming to terms with Robert Clive, and Robert Clive, he's able to negotiate no interference from the Bengal.
The Pashtun army, Mitch, would have been from Afghanistan, basically, and the north, what became the northwest frontier of India.
Yeah, and this is, and that's the thing. Like, this is why when we take Chandernagore, we don't have to worry about the Bengali army, because Suraj ad-Dawla, he negotiates a deal with Robert Clive but only lasts like a few months at best. But yeah, where Chandernagore falls without any interference from the Bengalis, and as we go up Hooghly River, he advances more towards the Qasim Bazaar area to retake taking territory there. There was another load of negotiations, but they went badly between both sides. Clive and Dawla could not come to a deal. So it's around this time that Clive hears of his conspiracy involving the likes of Mir Jafar, Manik Chand, who by this point had been put into prison for a short while because the fortress of Baj had fallen while under his command, even though he was nowhere near. And you then also have the Jagat Seth, if I'm pronouncing that right, family, Hindu merchants who had fallen out with Suraj ad-Dawla. And then there's a lesser-known merchant by the name of Omichand, who was a Sikh fella who at first was supportive of the French and Suraj ad-Dawla, but when Suraj ad-Dawla had first won over Calcutta and Qasim Bazaar, Omichand didn't feel that he got rewarded enough for helping Suraj ad-Dawla take these British areas. So Omichand easily just swapped over to us. Although he's very much like a little finger of He's kind of like a Peter Baelish of his story because he's not at all trustworthy. There are times where he does blackmail Clive and say, if you don't swear on paper to give me 5% of Suraj Ad-Dowlah's treasury, then I will leak this plan over to Suraj Ad-Dowlah. He doesn't do that because even though he does feel a tad insulted at first by the British, he's thinking, well, he's burnt all his bridges with Suraj Ad-Dowlah and he's got personal animosity with the guy. So this conspiracy continues, although there are times where the security of the plot looks to have been blown. Suraj Ad-Dowlah, he probably did have some suspicions, but he was never able to pin it. And also, he had very few loyal generals anyway. Like of his 8 generals in the army, only 3 of them were loyal. The rest of them, including Mir Jafar, his own uncle, were part of his plot to get rid of him. Because by this point, they hated him.
Again, this sort of thing is not all that uncommon in India. Generals and commanders changing side with their troops and all this sort of thing. This happened all the time in India. It was very common.
Yeah,
they were not, as you would say, reliable. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, and it's kind of like, I mean, this is another thing, like Indian nationalists will kind of sugarcoat this period as going, oh, well, the British won for Chukri and all this. I was like, well, again, that's a skill issue on the Indian part because there were plenty of their own elites who were ready to backstab their own side just for financial reward and political reward of some Robert Clive.
At some stage, Mitch, on this channel, on this stream, another week, we will do the Anglo-Sikh Wars. And that was full of generals betraying their troops and switching sides and all that. Just full of it. And that was, 90 years after this. So,
that's what happened with. So you get up to area in Plassey, where this is where Robert Clive decides to put in for the famous battle, and this was on the 23rd of June. So on the 23rd of June, he camps there. At this point, it'd been a few weeks since he last heard from Mir Jafar. So at this point, Clive was you could rarely ever regard Clive as being indecisive, but at this chapter, he particularly was, because he was thinking that the conspirators had gone back into the fold with Suraj Ad-Dowlah, but actually that wasn't the case. But like as I said, Clive didn't know for sure, but he decided to camp there because one of his subordinates by the name of Air Coote, he said, well, look, we can't turn back now, because if we turn back now, everyone, like, it's anticlimactic, and also it would just sink the morale of our troops. Like, we won't be able to display power like this for a long time.
Coote was a very good soldier, by the way. He was a skilled commander himself. William Grenville, welcome, sir. We're just Mitch is just building up to the Battle of Plassey, so I don't know if you had anything you wanted to add to that.
No, I just remember the chapter that I did a stream on with about Sir Major General Richard Hilton, who did an entire chapter around Clive because he's such a pivotal figure in the formation of the British Empire. And it's worth noting that Richard Hilton, I think accurately, there's a lot of obviously myths around the British Empire. There's a lot of particularly cultural Marxist oppression sort of thing, which is like the dominant theme in modern age. But also you have a lot of people who are on our side of things who probably don't appreciate of the extraordinary work of individuals and the character of individuals who manage to, achieve and form, the what would become, the empire in its entirety. It didn't come from the centre. It didn't really come from government in London or Westminster. It was from the peripheries of these sort of figures. People like, as I mentioned in the previous team, people like Cook, people like and people like Clive as well. These figures who were on the peripheries. And one thing I do remember from the book chapter was Clive got I'm just getting a bit ahead here, but he actually had requests from civil servants in London to cease acquiring territories, like actual lands, because they didn't have enough civil servants or people to send over as administrators to actually govern it effectively. Which I thought was quite funny. They had to ask him to like cease acquiring so much land.
Yeah, yeah. We were saying at the start of the stream, William, that Britain, prior to Plassey, Britain, although it was a power in India, it was by no means a dominant power at all. And
Well,
one
no,
of the things Mitch has been talking about has been the various conflicts with the French, who were still quite powerful at that stage in India.
oh yeah, the French were very much. You had the Dutch, and also you had the Mughal Empire, the Islamic Empire
Yeah,
in India,
yeah.
which was. I know some historians will say that that they were, sort of a weakened force, and in some regards they were up to this point, or they were sort of on their downward trajectory, but they were still a dominant force. And one thing that's quite funny about with India, I don't know if you mentioned this, like, because obviously you got the Hindu and Sikh population. India tends to be governed by foreign groups, whether it be those from the Hindu Kush or from or Persians. A lot of the Islamic rule, particularly in northern India, comes from a mixture of Turkic, Mongol, or even Persian royal families. So it's really funny. It's this great, it's a civilization, and it has very many groups and various sort of religious aspects to it. But they're very much easily governed by foreign peoples.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, I think you're right about that, William. Mitch, I believe you're back.
Yeah. Where was I? Oh yeah. So Plassey. Yeah. So the thing was, alongside it was something like 650 European troops, something like what was it? 1,000 sepoys and 600 sailors, and they had light artillery with them. Like, I think I don't know if it was like 6 pounders. It certainly was not beyond 10 pounders. Like, it was light artillery compared to what the Franco-Bengali army had at Plassey. So when you have on that fateful day on 23rd of June, you have in the case of the Franco-Bengali, they have 50,000 men, like 35,000 infantry, 15,000 cavalry. They've also got a small French force that provides a lot of firepower. I mean, we've also got a load of war elephants. So
And they had plenty of artillery, Mitch, as well, and they weren't short of muskets and what have you either. When you're looking at 18th century and early 19th century British armies fighting in India, they were not much better armed than the enemy. This is a myth. The Indians had plenty of artillery and plenty of muskets. And British muskets were as short ranged as the Indian ones, so probably shorter ranged in some cases.
Yeah, just in there on point. So, for example, we had 6 cannons, which were all 6 pounders, and 2 howitzers, whereas the French had 40, had 6 to 50 field pieces. And in the case of like the Bengali army, they had 53 pieces of artillery, which were mostly either 32 pounders, 24 pounders, or 18 pounders. So not only did they outnumber us by like something like the 20, so they had something like, I said, 50,000 men, and we had just over 3,000. So nearly, not far off from 20-1 outnumbered.
You can see why Clive had to think seriously about this battle, which he did beforehand.
Yeah. So
I remember. I also remember from Richard Sutton's obituary, there was one of the generals in the Nawab's force was actually made an agreement with Clive before the battle and said, Yes, I will. Yeah, if it goes your way, which you think it's going to go, I will tell my. He's basically like a vassal. I'll tell my men not to, you know, go and support the Nawab, and allies, and just basically sit the battle out, and sort of withdraw
But could you
from the
rely
field.
on that, William? Could you really rely on that? I mean, that you're
Well,
putting an awful lot on the word of someone who is already betraying somebody. So,
yeah, yeah. I mean, this is the thing. This is the ballsy thing about Clive. Is I think Clive, and this is something that Hilton sort of did hint at his thinking. Clive knew. 'Cause Clive basically his attitude was, if they betray me, like the worst thing that can happen is we just have to withdraw. But if they get caught, if they're sort of outed to the Nawab, given the sort of person he is, the death that they would receive would be extreme, to say the least, right? So, um, I think in some ways that he was able to see the fear of the Nawab and what could come from that end than anything else, and he was able to he was willing to gamble that. And one thing that he did do, which is was mentioned by Hilton, is Clive actually did forge a signature from, I think it was one of the admirals, maybe the vice admiral, I can't remember who. But he did forge himself personally a signature, which is the only thing that Major Hilton does say that is a bit of an ungentlemanly act, to do that. Because if he was caught doing that, or he was found out while doing it, then obviously Clive would have been punished for that quite severely. But yeah.
Mitch, would you like to carry on and tell us what happens in the battle?
Yeah. So on that day, you have Clive stations his men around this like sort of grove of trees, which do much to shelter his army from artillery, like from all these 18 pounders and 24 pounders and so on that Franco Bengali army had. And in the midst of a battle, you have this rainstorm which happens, which while Clive has tarpaulins to shield his gunpowder from getting wet, the French and Bengalis they didn't have that precaution, so all the gunpowder was wet, and we were at liberty to fire upon them. At one point in the battle, a guy called Mohan Lal, one of the few loyal generals to Siraj ad-Dowlah, at one point he thought that we ran out of gunpowder, so he decides to get his heavy cavalry to try and charge. And what happens is Mohan Lal and his cavalry just get cut to pieces by canister shot and our musket fire. After
Oh
that,
dear.
yeah. So what happens is that
Canister, by the way, guys, for anyone in the audience, it's a load of musket balls in a case that you fire from a cannon, and it basically turns the cannon into a gigantic shotgun and is very deadly at short range.
If anyone's played like Napoleon or Empire Total War and accidentally in a rookie move have seen that happen to infantry, it really just tears apart like infantry line. It's a devastating thing to happen.
yeah. So Siraj ad-Dowlah at this point he gets spooked and he goes like he literally begs to Mir Jafar, asking him to engage his right flank into the British army. He even at one point takes off his turban, which they put in the sort of power in terms of like the court politics of that time. Like taking off your turban in front of a subordinate, that's really like that signals a huge amount of desperation on Siraj ad-Dowlah's part. And Mir Jafar and the other generals who by this point were going ahead with a plan alongside Robert Clive, they advised Siraj ad-Dowlah leave with your troops, like leave from a battlefield and retreat in good order. Meanwhile, Mir Jafar he dispatches a messenger over to Robert Clive to tell him, "Okay, you can advance now. Like we've got Siraj ad-Dowlah to run away, and we'll take over the rest." Meanwhile, the French, they weren't told what was going to happen, so they're just left out in the open, and they just get cut to pieces by Robert Clive and his guys. So even though that that messenger in question, he didn't get to come to our lines because I think we accidentally killed him at one point because we didn't, as I said, we didn't know what was happening either on part of Mir Jafar and the other generals. But Robert Clive, as well as his subordinate Major Kilpatrick and Coote, they all recognised straight away what was happening once they saw Mir Jafar withdraw his troops and leave the French in the lurch. So, as a Robert Clive, he pounces on the French, and that small French force are cut to pieces, and all their firepower is gone in an instant. Not long after the battle, Siraj ad-Dawla, he gets killed off rather viciously by Mir Jafar's son, Miran, like brutally stabbed to death. And not long after that, Mir Jafar is put on the throne of Bengal, and you have this deal where, for example, the East India Company is exempted from any other customs duties for goods like saltpeter and what other goods? Nuts and tobacco, which were big exports from that area. So mixed value also with the other conspirators like the Jagat Seth family and Omichand getting rewarded. Well, Omichand, he felt that he should have been rewarded far more money because he overestimated how much money was in the Bengali treasury. But nevertheless, yeah, that's largely what happened with Plassey. Was just a matter of, in the grand scheme of things, we only lost something like, we didn't even lose 50 men in the entire battle. Meanwhile, the Franco-Bengali army lost altogether like around 500 men. But, of course, Siraj ad-Dawla, he loses all of his best loyal men in that battle.
Well, when we come to do a couple of streams on the Indian Mutiny, which we will at some point, possibly later in the year, one of the things that started the Indian Mutiny was the rumor that British rule in India would last 100 years. And it's usually dated from the Battle of Plassey in 1757. And this is why the Indian Mutiny broke out in 1757, or partly why the Indian Mutiny broke out in 1857. And of course, the Indians were about 100 years too soon about how long British rule was going to last. But yeah, we'll come to that later in the year when we talk about the Indian Mutiny. But it's interesting that the Battle of Plassey was still having an effect 100 years later.
I mean, of course, the other thing to mention legacy-wise is Clive, particularly in the last 10 years, is now being portrayed as this villain of history that exploited the poor, innocent, angelic Bengalese people.
Yeah, William, we were talking about, Mitch and I were talking about that before we went live, the vile propaganda that they come out with about Clive now. There were two schoolhouses, schools in Britain have a house.
Yeah.
And there were two of them named after Clive, and they both had their names changed to less worthy people because of the lefties and the Indians complaining about Clive.
I remember that it was like some cricket sportsman, and then you had some poet or something that nobody's ever heard of and non-important. Yeah, and in Wales they changed. I think they changed like the name of his house or something like that. It was ridiculous, and
there's been some pressure to have statues of Clive removed, which so far I'm happy to say have been resisted. But
give it time. It's problem. It's kind of like a sort of a race against time with these sorts of people. But I mean, some of the things that are levied against him, like they've sort of said about this Bengal famine. Now, I remember there was one article that said that, and I don't know if they confused him with Churchill. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know, but they claimed that Clive was responsible for 10 million Bengalese to die in a famine.
Yes.
Well, number one, I don't think there was 10 million people in Bengal at the time, or if there was, it would have been like about half the population. So that's insane. on the second point, the actual land owned by the East India Company wasn't decided by Clive. He was just an administrator, and then just a sort of military figure. There were other people above him. And on the third point, most of the land in Bengal was still owned by local royalty and principalities. So
Yes,
any
absolutely
sort of
true. Yeah.
any mismanagement of the economy or agriculture was down to them. And famines in India happened before the British arrived and the company arrived. It happened after it.
Yeah,
I mean,
famines in India have happened relatively recently, even. It's
yeah,
worth pointing out that Wrong Tao Wu in the chat is pointing out about the nitrate trade in India. And nitrate, as Mitch was saying earlier, is something you need to make gunpowder. And not only did it make British gunpowder relatively cheap, British gunpowder was actually of a superior quality to most other people's gunpowder. For example, British gunpowder in the Napoleonic Wars was better than that of the French. It was more reliable and a little bit more powerful. So that was an advantage too.
so this sort of like attack legacy, it is totally fabricated. It's totally astroturfed, and it has no foundation in any sort of factual history in the setting in there. To be honest, it's you looked at the attacks on Churchill with Bengal and stuff. You have to go into sort of economic arguments there, because that whole thing's iffy anyway. This one is very, very easy to disprove in its entirety. Very easy to disprove. And I mean, to be honest, Clive was dealing with incredibly greedy princes, as Hilton talked about
he
it.
was William, but also it's worth pointing out that he even in his own time, he had political enemies in Britain, and those people, because they were jealous of him because of his success and the fact he did become rich, without doubt. But if he was successful, that's what happens when you're successful.
Yeah, I think
there were people who tried to blacken his reputation even while he was alive. So
I think also it's worth noting that, and this is a very common misconception at this time. So what, 1757, right?
Yes.
The British government, like the actual, the British state. Yes, the East India Company was, it was technically a private company. It wasn't directly connected, but the British government couldn't exactly direct them or told them to do this, that, or the other. That's not how it worked. This was a private company, like the Hudson Bay Company, and so on and so forth. Now, of course, there were certain circumstances on the military level and all that sort of stuff, where they all worked together in tangent. So there was never this huge disagreement. But at the same time, it was like this autonomous private company that was operating in the Indian subcontinent.
And also, William, of course, back in those days, it took literally months to send an order from London to India. It took months to get there because you had to sail all around the Cape of Good Hope to get to India. So if the British government did want to cause something to happen or stop something happening, they weren't really able to, because you're looking at 6 months for the message to get out to India.
Like Clive found out, he already acquired, I think it was the Sindh province or one or several provinces in India, and then he got the letter afterwards saying, by the way, you need to stop acquiring land and territory. And it was whoops, too late, it's already happened.
Bit late, already done it. There you go.
Yeah. I wonder if it'd be remiss to compare Clive to Caesar, because it's when Caesar conquers Gaul, he's got plenty of enemies, plus plenty of Roman senators didn't want to conquer Gaul.
That's what I was thinking. that was like when I was thinking about the peripheries, like people who like make these empires great, great in every aspect. It's funny because with Gaul, the senators like Pompey and the others, and the senators, allies of Pompey's, viewed him as like as a war criminal, as this villain, and someone who was misusing senatorial power. And there were people, as you mentioned, people in Whitehall, people in government, who weren't happy with Clive's success in India, which is quite funny because that is what that was sort of, and I know India has been was talked about as the jewel in the crown of the British Empire. In many ways, Gaul was seen as an incredible achievement in Rome itself because of the territory, of the prestige, but also the great victories over the Gallic tribes, which had harassed and been like one of the old enemies of the Roman people. They sacked Rome in its infancy.
Well, people in the chat are talking about good and bad things that the British did in India. Bear in mind, it was because of people like Clive that Britain became the dominant force in India. And when Britain became the dominant force in India, one of the things they did was they banned sati, which is where Hindu widows were thrown alive onto their husband's funeral pyre. Sometimes quite young girls, because these people had harems,
Yeah, arranged mat. Yeah.
Yeah, the Brits banned that. The Brits also got rid of the thuggies, who were religious bandits, is probably the best way to describe them, who had plagued the roads of India for hundreds of years. And it was the British that got rid of that. And in addition to that, we also set up reasonably fair courts where small farmers had a chance of getting some sort of justice against big landowners, which they certainly never had when the Indians ran the place.
Yeah, I just on this topic, I'd also because there's a small passage, or because he said like Robert Clive's achievement in India had been far greater than that of the Spanish conquistadors. He overcame a people that were 10 times as numerous as Cortez did in Mexico, confronting huge armies equipped with artillery, firearms, horses, and elephants, belonging to one of the greatest and most advanced civilizations in the world. Whereas you compare that to the Aztecs, who were the complete opposite. Like, they didn't even have horses, let alone elephants. And also, Robert Clive conquered India pretty much.
The Aztecs didn't even have steel swords.
It's also the Aztecs arrived in Mexicana, as they called it. I think it was in the 15th century. Sorry, no, it was in the. I think it was like in the 12th century or something like that.
But even by the time the conquistadors arrived in South America and Central America, the Aztecs didn't even have metal swords. They used to put obsidian in wooden blades, like obsidian is volcanic glass.
Yeah,
and that was their swords and what have you. They didn't even have metal weapons. So from that point of view, the Indians were a damn sight harder to conquer than the Aztecs were.
Yeah, I think I think the only other thing that like, because you get Indians also say, oh, the British Empire was bad, also because they trashed a lot of heritage, and it's like, well, you take for example Sanskrit. The only reason Sanskrit is still able to be studied to this day is because of Englishmen who studied it back in the late 18th century. Like Warren Hastings probably did a lot more for Indian culture than a lot of Indian elites over the years, which is also ironic.
Well, a lot of Indian culture was, depending on where you lived in India at the time. As I said, I mentioned earlier, most of India has been where there've been Hindus and stuff, or what have you, or Jains, or even like Buddhists lived in they were ruled over by Muslims, whether it be the Mughals or the Delhi Sultanate or the Ghassanids or whatever. And so in that sense, like when they say look at ruined temples, it wasn't really the British that did it. It was just the fact that in those areas, some people converted to Islam or what have you, or or moved out and it was repopulated. So I've heard this, like they say, like the old temples or these old statues or something, and some accusation of it was the British that allowed it to fall into disrepair. And it's like, no, it's literally just the people that, I mean, take Bengal for example. Bengal up until the 14th century was still majority, like I guess you say, like a mix of Hinduism, Buddhism, and paganist religion. And Islam didn't really take off until into like the 15th century. There, it became like an Islamic sultanate. Like there was like on the masses started converting to Islam. So yeah,
Well,
there's a lot of bad
there's a
faith
lot.
arguments. Bad faith arguments.
Oh yeah, William. There's a lot of the archaeological work and what have you in India, including around temples and what have you that you're speaking about. A lot of that was done by the British.
Yeah, and recently, I say recent years, you've had well, I know in India there's been like I think it was in 2007 you had like the large scale, um, like ethnic riots and even like mass killings by Hindu and Muslim mobs because of places of like a mosque or a Hindu temple and what proximity it gets to be into, in this sacred place or what have
Sure,
you.
and hundreds of thousands of people were killed when India got independence, and they were moving from Pakistan and Bangladesh, India, and all over the place. Hundreds of thousands of people died. But yeah, I mean that's just the fact. And if you look at India today in 2025, sorry, 2026. Even today, the majority of the infrastructure that supports India, like the railways and the roads, the overwhelming majority of it was built by the British.
I mean, I mean, without sort of joking, say that ginger haired. I don't know if he's Scottish, but I've seen like clips of him. I mentioned on here before who goes with a bagpipe. He went around India like with a bagpipe, dressed up in like some Highland regimental ceremonial outfit or anything. And whenever he's like playing the bagpipes, you always have like somebody who'll walk up and he'll be like chanting British Empire, or even like someone said, "Come back here and rule again," the sort of thing. Um,
Yeah, I was watching Bald and Bankrupt in India, and a couple of Indians said that to him. We want the British to come back. So
I mean, there is kind of there is. I think there is like in some. I mean, there are some parts of India, particularly I know personally one Anglo-Indian who when he moved to this country, he was like, I mean, ultimately, yeah, he was I think his father was white British and his mother was an Indian, so Anglo-Indian in that regard. Um, and he was a product of, I think he was, uh, well, he was born after, obviously after it, but his parents grew up in the Raj, and massively loved the Raj, and it's also worth noting that a lot of the narratives, particularly that god awful film Gandhi, that Gandhi film, that's like the worst one going. Um, it negates the fact that large parts of Indians wouldn't really see, unless you get to a fort or something like that, or to Delhi or what have you, you wouldn't see actually the Raj like you would think you would, what's depicted in films, because most of India was governed by their local rulers. It was governed by their various maharajas or uh, or what have you. Whatever the
yeah,
Muslim
absolutely,
equivalent was.
Yeah.
absolutely true.
I think like the only thing I could was because someone says about how it's only white people who care about the anthropology and so on, like the history of like India, for example. I think it was Enoch Powell himself who once said he remarked that India had a more glorious past than England because he was reading something. I think he was reading a Bhagavad Gita or something like that, or one of those old Sanskrit texts. So even someone like there's a sense of irony about it. Indians don't care about their own heritage as much as someone in a poll had done.
Mitch, would you like to finish up the story of Clive? Because sadly, he didn't actually live that much longer after Plassey, did he?
Nah, he died. So not long. Not so in 1759 or 1760. He goes back to England for a period of 5 years, back home with his wife, where again, like he sets up. For example, it has this small village in County Clare in Ireland that renamed to Plassey because he was given it because Duke of Newcastle, who was the Prime Minister at the time, under George III, he was looking for Clive's support in regarding sort of peace overtures, and later on you have also the Earl of Bute. So Clive gets given Irish barony. He was hoping for an English peerage, but at the end of the day, being given a barony in Ireland ensures at least he's got his foot in the door, so to speak, when talking about any future peace deal over Ireland, over India.
Second place prize. Jokes, of course.
Yeah. I found that funny as well when I was reading that earlier. But so you have that, and then in the meantime, the EIC, they handled Bengal pretty poorly compared to what. So Clive has to come in later again, anyway, in 1764 to bail the EIC out of their mess again. So they get rid of Mir Jafar because Mir Jafar, like his predecessor Suraj ad-Dawla, he's very slow to repay the EIC. He's very slow, and he was known to be quite tricky guy to deal with. So it was a matter of Clive had to go back and sort out the mess. He basically becomes almost like, some people would regard him as like a dictator in context of Bengal. Like he has to bully the civil servants in the EIC to do their job when he's telling them, okay, you have to administer the entirety of Bengal, because after Mir Jafar, we put in his son Miran, who we have to get rid of because he's too violent and impulsive. And then after him, there's another son of Mir Jafar by the name of Mir Qasim, who was a bastard son by a dancing girl, if I remember correctly. But with Mir Qasim, aside from having sex with women, he wasn't particularly interested in anything else. So he was pretty easy to just rule over for a time. But he dies of venereal disease and he has no heirs. So in the end, it was kind of like Robert Clive at this point. He just chooses, okay, it's going to be the EIC who administer the place. Although the EIC, after Robert Clive leaves in 1767 for the last time from India, the EIC are not really making much of a profit in the late 1760s. Plus, when he does get back to England, Parliament, especially guys like John Burgoyne, the same Burgoyne who gets his arse handed to him, Saratoga campaign, Burgoyne, among others, are willing to try and take him down a peg because of his success in India. Like, they're jealous of him, claiming, for example, that the famine in India, like the famine in Bengal, was all his fault. No, it wasn't. It was, as mentioned, the thing was, a lot of the merchants and the lords who owned land, they were changing from rice to cash crops, such as tobacco, as well as opium, for that matter, as well. Like, they were growing poppies. So opium, tobacco, as well as what was the other one? It wasn't sugar. I'm trying to think now. Trying to think of a cash crop from the top of my head. But yeah, that was what they were doing. They were changing.
Tobacco was quite big. So cotton became quite big. Eventually.
Yeah, that was it. Cotton. Yeah, cotton. Yeah. And they tried to say, Robert Clive ordered these Indian farmers to switch to cotton, and it's like, and Robert Clive, he did defend himself pretty well in court, to a point where one could remark he would have made a great solicitor, despite the fact that in his youth, people didn't think he would make a good one on account of how boisterous he was. But yeah, he was defending himself pretty well. And the thing was, I'm trying to. 1772, I believe he committed suicide. Hold on. I'll get my notes. Yeah, 1774. Sorry, is when so he's in his late 40s. He literally stabbed himself in the neck with a knife because the thing was, the pain from the stones in his gallbladder was so much that he just chose to take his own life. Plus, he felt there was a sense of he felt that he would never get gratitude for his accomplishments in India, as well as of course he felt that there was always a target on his back from the likes of John Burgoyne, among others.
He was only 49, I believe.
Yeah, so yeah, he was born in 1725, so yeah, 49.
But he a great man, and he did so much in such a short life. When you think about it,
Yeah, it's like you take for example, it was age of 23 was when he started commanding troops out in the field, and then 12 years later, at the age of 35, so by the time he gets into 1760s, he's just won over Bengal, for example, and he's really loved. And you can say, in a sense, he becomes a master of India because you got a factor, as mentioned earlier, Bengal was the jewel of the Mughal crown, and because of how fractured the Mughal Empire was, if EIC controlled Bengal, for example, they pretty much become a de facto big fish in the Indian pond, so to speak.
Someone in the chat was asking about venereal diseases and the troops in India. What I can tell you about that is that regiments often ran unofficially, of course, their own brothels for the troops, where the chicks were inspected by the medical officer and this kind of thing to try and keep that down. I mean, I'm sure people did catch STDs of various descriptions. I'm sure they did. Troops being troops, but the regiments did try and keep it down.
I know, there was one case where the EIC sent, back in London, they ordered Clive to clamp down on prostitution between the EIC troops and the local prostitutes, which you can imagine is not going to go down too well.
Yeah, Clive, I don't think it would have even been practical, to be honest. But
yeah. So
I mean, even the Victorians couldn't do anything much about that. So
yeah. So Robert Clive, he ends up getting hated by a lot of soldiers on the ground. But to be fair, you can't really blame him because that's a direct order from the EIC back home. As for the civil service in the area, he does bully them quite a lot. But to be fair, it was a matter of they themselves were quite poor under previous management, so he felt they had to resort to bullying them. And also, to be fair, as he was quite irritable in his temperament because, as that pain from his stones in his gallbladder.
It's also, Mitch, it's worth pointing out that you were saying earlier that the Honourable East India Company wasn't particularly profitable in the later 18th century. And it's a fact that eventually it was pretty much taken over by the British government. Officially, it was kept going. In fact, I think officially there's still something that's the Honourable East India Company, but all it does these days is buying tea. But it more or less became an arm of the British government. Like the directors of the Honourable East India Company were eventually appointed by the British government. So
I think
long before the mutiny, the Honourable East India Company wasn't even a for-profit company by that stage.
I think the company was bought by the states for about, what was it? It was like a couple pounds or something like that. So it was just bought up obviously after the mutiny. The Hudson Bay company is still going. They sell, I think they do like handbags and stuff like that. Department store.
Yeah. Well, as I say, the Honourable East India Company is still going, but all they do these days is something to do with buying Indian tea. That's the only thing they do, which of course is quite important in Britain. Britain being such a big tea drinking nation.
I guess if I rock up to like the Hudson Bay headquarters in Canada and just say, I want to explore and expand the frontier and chart everything.
Someone in the chat is saying they recently went bankrupt, AI. The Hudson's Bay Company, he means. And I know a military theorist is a Canadian. So they've closed all their stores, apparently.
Can I purchase? Can we? Guys, if we collectively we could purchase the Hudson Bay Company right here.
Yeah. Started off as a new imperial enterprise.
Yeah, the space. We're taking the Hudson Bay Company to space. We're going to get some of that alien fur trade coming in.
All right, I'm going to check our entropy. Right, we've got 3 entropy chats. Thank you very much, people. Military theorist sent $5 and didn't send a message. Thank you very much for that, military theorist. Aubreyality sent $25. Aubreyality, you should not be doing that. And again, didn't send a message, but thank you very much, Aubreyality. And as I said earlier, Wrongtown Wu also sent $25 and said, thank you for your help, Iron Duke. And because I was helping Wrongtown Wu help out a mutual friend in Britain yesterday. So, thank you very much for those guys. They're much appreciated. I will refresh it just in case we got another one, because I occasionally miss one that way. Nope, that's fine. Okay. Any final thoughts, Mitch and William Grenville?
So with Robert Clive, just to tap off like why he won. Put simply, his own strategic acumen in terms of, like, for example, Battle of Plassey, as well as his time in the Carnatic, his own strength of will, I suppose you could say. Like, he's sort of a great man, if you're going off of Thomas Carlyle's great man theory. Secondly, he was able to work pretty well with local Indian rulers, especially guys like Mir Jafar, who one could argue you can't really trust, but he was able to psychologically give a measure of them and plan accordingly. Whereas, for example, I mentioned Duplay earlier. He was replaced by a guy called the Comte de Lally, who was an Irish Jacobite fella by the name of Thomas Arthur, who he does win him Carnatic for a short while in the midst of the 7 Years' War, but then he gets defeated pretty decisively by Eyre Coote, because the thing was, Eyre Coote had far more sepoys and he had a better relationship with native rulers in the neck of the woods.
And as I said earlier, Mitch, Eyre Coote was a very good soldier, actually, a much underrated soldier.
Yeah. So, whereas a Comte de Lally, basically he thought that he could do everything by kind of himself, or at least do everything with only using Europeans. But of course, as Robert Clive once said, you can't make war inland into India without a good relationship with native rulers. It's just impossible. And unfortunately, the French didn't do that in the 7 Years' War, which is why they lost out big time, to the point where they were only relegated to Pondicherry, which even meant like it was. I think it just became a net loss for them in the end, anyway.
Yeah, it was just as they had that, and I think they had one other place. They had 2 little bits of India, and of course, as we said earlier in the stream, the Portuguese kept Goa until about 1960, I think, when the Indians invaded the place. Anyway, Lofa Sheffield in the chat is going back to talking about prostitutes and pox and the clap and all this kind of thing. All I can say to you, mate, is that that's always been a concern for armies. This is why all World War II armies, and I mean all of them, the Brits, the Americans, the Germans, the French, the Japanese, the Italians, everybody issued troops with condoms. And you get nonsense like, oh yeah, troops used to use and keep water out of rifle barrels. Bullshit. They were issued condoms to stop them getting the clap. At one stage, there were more British and American soldiers in Italy who were casualties of venereal disease than that were casualties from the Germans. It was a very big deal. Same thing with the German army. This is why it's always been a big deal. If you've got lots and lots of healthy young men together, you're going to get that sort of thing going on. And as I said, the way they tried to deal with it in places like India before the First World War was that regiments would run their own brothels unofficially, because if they did it officially, they'd get in trouble. and the medical officer of the regiment would inspect these women on a regular basis, and they tried to keep it down that way. But although, of course, sometimes troops would go elsewhere, but
it's also worth noting in history, if you read like maybe from medieval or early modern, any accounts that soldiers would be entertained by actors, it's worth noting that they did some people, the word actor and prostitute was quite
you mean
interchangeable.
actress, William?
Oh,
You mean actress?
actress, or prostitute. Sorry, I should say, actress or prostitute is an interchange. It basically means the same thing
It
for a
did,
lot of people back
yes.
then.
It
So,
absolutely did, yes.
so people, if you're looking at that, it's not mean they're putting on like a good stage production or anything like that. I mean, maybe there is good stage production, but there's also other things involved. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. William, did you have anything else to say on the subject of tonight's stream?
No, I'm gonna have to head off now. I just thought I'd just drop in it here and just to say, because of course I talked about it on a chapter when we were going with Major
Yeah,
General
no,
Richard Hilton, and
that's why I thought you'd be interested in joining us, and it's always good to have another voice anyway. But yeah, thank you for joining in, William. You're most welcome as always. Mitch, anything else you wanted to say? And also, Mitch and William, anything you guys want to plug?
I can't think of plugging anything. I mean, I might, if anyone's interested in if anyone's interested in like the books, I read for this. I mean, there's one book called "Global 7 Years War" by a guy called Daniel Baugh, Baugh, who, if anyone's, I mean, I was planning on, because we're not for the internet being down over my end last week. I would have joined Matt Canada's stream, and that was a book. It's a good book about the 7 Years War, because there's not that many books, unfortunately, about particular conflicts.
Well, at some stage, we'll have to do the European side of it, because Britain did send an army to Europe to cooperate with Frederick the Great. So at some stage, we'll do that, but I don't think we'll do it next week. We'll do something else next week. William, would you like to plug your channel?
Yeah, I got William Grenville, formerly AI Tory. Do check out my channel there. Check out the Pendragon Foundation that's dealing with the castle.
Someone's asking, what are you on Twitter? AI also.
It should come up. I'm still Shire 0 seats Tory. It will say William Grenville. It'll come up with the current profile pic I'm using here. Yeah, so if you type in that Shire 0 seats Tory, it should come up. You should see my profile.
You can also find Mitch on Twitter, by the way, guys. And if you want to find him, look at my Twitter, because I reposted a couple of his posts earlier.
Yeah. I also want to see the castle stuff, but I also want to plug somebody, a friend of mine is working on it for people who are who watching this and who are into Crusader Kings, particularly Crusader Kings 3. In April, he's been working on a mod with a group of people, which is going to be inspired on the novels by Bernard Cornwell, The Winter King.
Yeah, I saw that on the Discord.
Yeah, it's this is going to be a mod for the Winter King, so it's going to be set in the 5th century. I think it's 480, and it's going to be it's going to be like a detailed map of the British Isles, like even like a really like detailed map of the British Isles, and
Cool.
you're gonna have all the characters from the novel. You're gonna have the various different you're gonna have like the Celts, the Gaelic, the Anglo-Saxons, and you're gonna have to deal, if you're the Celts, you're gonna have to deal with the encroachment of the Anglo-Saxons in sub-Roman Britain, and also Irish expansionism in places like Western Wales and Cornwall or what have you. So
Okay.
that mod is I've seen a bit of it. It looks quite interesting. It's quite story focused. It's not like King Arthur. It is fictionalized because there are like King Arthur and stuff like that in it. So but apart from that, yeah.
Fair enough. Fair enough. All right, guys, we will be back on Saturday with our normal politics and current affairs stream, same time as this evening, but on Saturday evening UK time, which is very early on the morning of Sunday for me. I am going to try and play us out the tune if it works, which is an era tune that comes from this era. Let's see. There we go. Let's see if it plays.
On his death doing dog who dares venture his neck. Come follow the hero that goes to Quebec, jump aboard all.
If it doesn't stop playing, of course.
Of the transport and lose every sail, pay your debts at the tavern by giving the bail, and ye that love fighting shall soon have enough. Oh, well, come on, us boys, we shall give them hot stuff. Up the river St. Lawrence our troops shall advance. To the Grenadiers' march we will teach them to dance. If Breton we've taken, and next we will fly at their capital to give them another black eye. But life is in vain, you pretend to look rough. Those are coming who know how to give you hot stuff. With powder in his periwig and snuff in his nose, Monsieur will run down our descent to oppose, and the Indians will come, but the light infantry will soon oblige them to take to a tree. From such rascals as these may we fear our rebuff. Advance, Grenadiers, and let fly your hot stuff. When the 47th Regiment is dashing ashore, while bullets are whistling and cannon do roar, said Montgomery's are Shirley's, I know they'll upheld. Till I said Ned Botwood, oh, we are with ourselves. Though our clothing is changed, yet we scorn a powder puff. So at you busters, here's give you hot stuff.
Okay, and that was from a friend of the channel, Patriotic Archive. Go and check out Patriotic Archive's YouTube channel. He's got some good music. I should really have played that last week for the Conquest of Canada stream, but it belongs to the same war and the glorious year of 1757 when Britain was winning all over the world. So, yeah, thank you very much to Mitch, who was the main contributor to this stream, and also to my guest, William Granville. And thanks for joining us, and we'll see you on Saturday, guys. Go well.